A single choice can upend a lifetime, especially when made at a table where fate deals its cruelest hand. Tonight, a guarded heart is forced to confront the consequences of a wager that should never have touched another life. A household on the brink of ruin, a man convinced he was destined for solitude, and a woman who refuses to be traded like a debt, even as circumstance threatens to bind their futures together forever. Whispers rise, judgment closes in, and an impossible decision looms between honor and survival. Before we begin, tell me, from where are you listening to this story, and what do you love most about historical romances? In the shadowed drawing room of Blackwood Manor, nestled amid the misty fells of the Lake District, Edward Harrington, the Marquess of Windermere, stared into the dying embers of the fire. The year was 1815, and the weight of his title felt like chains forged in solitude. At 35, he was a man carved from granite, tall, broad-shouldered, with raven hair streaked prematurely grey at the temples, and eyes the colour of storm-tossed lakes. His face, handsome in its severity, bore the faint scar of a duel long past, a reminder of passions that had cooled to ash. He poured another glass of brandy, the crystal decanter catching the flicker of candlelight. The manor, once alive with laughter, now echoed with silence. His parents gone, his siblings scattered or lost to fever. Edward had vowed never to marry. Love was a gambler's folly, he told himself, a hand dealt by fate only to be folded in ruin. Yet tonight, restlessness gnawed at him like the wind rattling the leaded windows. A knock echoed through the hall. His butler, old Jenkins, entered with a silver tray bearing a sealed letter. "From Lord Ashford, my lord. Urgent," he says. Edward broke the wax seal, his brow furrowing. The note was brief, a summons to a private card party at Ashford's estate in Keswick, 2 nights hence. High stakes, it promised, whiskey, wits, and whispers of fortunes won or lost. Edward crumpled the paper. Gambling had been his vice since Oxford, a way to drown the emptiness. Why not? What did he have to lose but more of the nothing that defined him? The carriage jolted over rutted lanes the next evening, rain lashing the panes like accusations. Edward arrived at Ashford Hall, soaked and irritable, the air thick with pipe smoke and the murmur of titled gentlemen. Candlelight danced on polished oak, illuminating faces flushed with anticipation. Lord Ashford, a portly viscount with a penchant for mischief, clapped him on the back. "Windermere, knew you'd come. We've a twist tonight, something to stir even your stoic blood." The group settled around a baize-covered table. Ashford, a young earl named Tristan Vale, and a few others whose names blurred in Edward's mind. Cards were dealt. Faro, with escalating wagers. Gold coins piled like fallen leaves. Edward played methodically, his wins steady but joyless. Then Ashford leaned in, eyes gleaming. "Gentlemen, shall we raise the stakes? Not mere coin, I propose. Assets of a more personal nature." Murmurs rippled. Edward's hand tightened on his cards. "What folly is this?" Ashford grinned. "My estate's stables include a prize mare worth £5,000, but I offer something rarer." He paused, savouring the drama. "A debt owed by a family in dire straits. The Hawthorne estate, bordering your lands, encumbered, they say, by the father's passing. The widow and her daughter seek a match to save it. I'll throw in an introduction, sealed by the winner's hand." Edward's pulse quickened. The Hawthornes. He'd heard whispers. Eleanor Hawthorne, the daughter, a beauty of 22, sharp-tongued and unyielding, trapped in a crumbling manor with her ailing mother. Marriage? The words soured in his mouth, yet the table's energy shifted, eyes on him, the lone Marquess, untethered. Tristan Vale folded early, chuckling. A bride as prize? Sounds like a ballad gone wrong. The deal circled. Edward's cards, a strong hand, queen high. He matched the bet, then raised. Ashford's eyes narrowed, but he called. The final cards fell, silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Edward won. Ashford slapped the table, laughing ruefully. "The mare's yours and the introduction. But mind you, Windermere, the Hawthorns are proud folk. That daughter won't be bartered lightly." Edward pocketed his winnings, a strange heat blooming in his chest. Pride, pity, or something sharper like the edge of destiny. He excused himself early, the rain welcoming him back to solitude. But as the carriage bore him home, the manor's lights piercing the gloom, he couldn't shake the image. A woman with Hawthorne's rumoured fire, stepping from shadows into his barren world. Little did he know that Gamble had dealt not just cards, but the hand of fate itself. Eleanor Hawthorne waited, unaware, in her modest parlour, mending a tear in her mother's shawl by firelight. Her gown, a simple muslin of faded blue, hugged her slender frame, auburn curls escaping a practical knot. At 22, she was the picture of quiet defiance, green eyes fierce, lips curved in perpetual skepticism. The estate teetered on ruin since father's death 2 years prior, debts mounting like winter frost. Mother coughed softly from her chair. "Eleanor, dear, we've letters from suitors again. Perhaps it's time—" "No, Mother." Eleanor's voice was firm, needle pausing. "I won't be auctioned like livestock. We'll find another way." But whispers from the village reached even their isolated halls, a Marquess's interest, sparked by cards and chance. Eleanor dismissed it as gossip, yet as thunder rolled over the lakes, a shiver traced her spine. Change brewed, unbidden and fierce. Back at Blackwood Manor, Edward tossed the letter onto his desk. An introduction tomorrow, Ashford had arranged. He paced, the scar on his cheek itching under candlelight. Die alone, perhaps, but this gamble. It whispered of life, of children he never dreamed, of a mother to their legacy. He extinguished the flame, plunging into darkness. Tomorrow, the game truly began. And in that moment, as sleep evaded him, Edward Harrington felt the first crack in his armoured heart, a hook of hope, sharp and unrelenting. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Hawthorne Manor, casting delicate patterns on the worn Persian rug. Eleanor Hawthorne rose early, as always, her bare feet padding across the cool oak floors of her modest bedchamber. At 22, she carried the weight of the world on her slender shoulders, her auburn hair tied back in a simple ribbon, away from a face that held both fragility and fire. Her gown, a practical cotton of soft grey, spoke of economy, high-necked, long-sleeved, with a modest fichu to cover her collarbone. It was the attire of a gentlewoman fallen on hard times, far from the silks and satins of London's drawing rooms. Downstairs, in the breakfast parlour, the air smelled of fresh bread and weak tea. The room, once grand with its panelled walls and silver candelabras, now bore the scars of neglect, a crack in the plaster from last winter's frost, chairs with frayed upholstery. Eleanor's mother, Lady Margaret Hawthorne, sat by the window, her silver-streaked hair neatly coiled under a lace cap. At 50, she was a shadow of her former self, her health fragile since the fever that had claimed Lord Hawthorne 2 years past. The debts had mounted then, vintage loans from careless merchants, a failed harvest on their lakeside fields. The manor teetered, its few tenants whispering of auctions to come. "Good morning, Mother," Eleanor said, pouring tea from a chipped pot. Her voice was steady, laced with the refined accent of their Yorkshire roots, softened by years in the Lake District. She set a plate before her mother. Toast, a sliver of cheese, preserved plums from the orchard. No luxuries here. The cook had been dismissed months ago, leaving Eleanor to manage the household with the aid of 2 loyal maids, Bess and young Tilly. Margaret smiled faintly, her blue eyes dimmed by worry. "Eleanor, you spoil me, but we must speak of the letters. Mr. Hargrove's proposal arrived yesterday, steady income from his mill and a cottage in Ambleside. It's respectable." Eleanor's fork paused mid-air. She felt the familiar knot in her chest tighten. Hargrove was a widower of 40, kind enough, but his gaze lingered too long on her figure during village assemblies. Marriage for security? It chafed like ill-fitted stays. "Mother, we've discussed this. I am not a commodity to be traded for solvency. The estate will hold. I'll write to cousin Lydia in York. Perhaps she can lend against father's old bonds." Margaret sighed, folding her napkin with trembling hands. "My dear, pride is a cold bedfellow. The village talks of bailiffs at the door, of you spinning webs to catch a titled fish. And now this rumour from Keswick. A Marquess, they say, won an introduction to us in some gentleman's game. Absurd, but it stirs the gossips." Eleanor's cheeks warmed. She had heard the whispers from Bess that morning, while hanging linens in the misty garden. The Lake District's close-knit hamlets thrived on such tales. Tellers at the inn, spinning yarns of high-born wagers. A Marquess? Windermere, perhaps, the reclusive lord of Blackwood Manor, 5 miles yonder. She knew of him only by reputation. A stern widower, no, unmarried. They said, haunted by losses, avoiding society like the plague. "Idle chatter, mother. Men gamble away horses and lands, not daughters. I'll visit the tenants today. The sheep need checking before the rains." After breakfast, Eleanor donned her Spencer jacket and bonnet, the woolen fabric mended at the hems. She stepped into the crisp air, the lake's waters lapping at the shore below the manor like a restless suitor. The path wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, foxgloves and heather, where her father's ghost seemed to linger in every breeze. Hawthorne Manor had been his pride, built in the last century on these fertile slopes, overlooking Windermere's glassy expanse. Now it was hers to salvage. She called on old Mr. Fletcher first, their head shepherd, his croft smelling of peat and lanolin. "Miss Eleanor," he greeted, doffing his cap, his face weathered like the fells. "The ewes are faring well, but the fences need mending. And word from the market, wool prices dip again." Eleanor nodded, her gloved hand sketching notes in a small, leather-bound journal. "We'll manage the repairs from the timber lot. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher." As she moved on to Widow Tate's cottage, helping with the butter churn, the women's talk turned inevitable. "Seen the postboy with a fancy seal this morn?" Widow Tate said, wiping flour from her apron. "From Ashford Hall, bound for here. Something grand comin', eh?" Eleanor's pulse skipped. She forced a laugh, light and dismissive. Likely a bill from the draper. Nothing more. But inside, unease stirred. The social codes of their world were ironclad. A lady's reputation hinged on whispers, on the propriety of visits and calls. An unsolicited introduction from a viscount like Ashford could upend everything, drawing eyes, forcing choices. By afternoon, back at the manor, Eleanor retreated to the library, its shelves half empty. Father's books sold to pay the butcher. She dusted the pianoforte, untouched since her debut at the Keswick Assembly 3 seasons ago. Her fingers traced the keys, coaxing a soft melody, a lament from Handel's suites, evoking lost summers on the lake. Music was her solace, a private rebellion against the ledgers that haunted her nights. A knock at the front door shattered the quiet. Bess hurried in, eyes wide. "Miss, a messenger from Lord Ashford, says it's for you personally." Eleanor's heart thudded. She took the sealed missive, the wax embossed with a fox and hounds, Ashford's crest. Breaking it open, she read the elegant script, an invitation to tea at Ashford Hall tomorrow, with a veiled mention of a mutual acquaintance of note, the Marquess of Windermere, who expresses interest in your family's prospects. The paper trembled in her grip. Interest, prospects. It reeked of the gambler's table, of her fate diced like cards. She crumpled it, but the words lingered, a serpent in the garden. Mother called from the parlour, oblivious. Eleanor stared out at the gathering clouds over the lake, the first drops of rain pattering the panes. What game had fate dealt now? Tomorrow She would face it or flee, but deep down a spark flickered, curiosity mingled with dread. The winds of change howled closer, threatening to uproot her world. The rain had turned the lanes to mud by the time Eleanor reached Ashford Hall the next afternoon. Her carriage, a borrowed gig from the stables, Hawthorne's finer coach long-soled, splashed through puddles, the horse's hooves churning the earth. She clutched the invitation in her lap, its edges frayed from her restless fingers. At 22, Eleanor had navigated village teas and tenant suppers with poise, but this felt like stepping onto a stage unscripted. The manor's debts loomed larger than ever. Refusing Ashford's summons might invite more whispers, perhaps even the bailiff's knock sooner than expected. Ashford Hall rose against the stormy sky, its stone facade dripping with ivy, towers piercing the low clouds like accusatory fingers. A footman in livery took the reins as Eleanor descended, smoothing her gown, a sprigged muslin in pale green, its bodice fitted modestly over a chemisette. The skirt gathered just so to allow for walking without impropriety. Her bonnet, trimmed with a single ribbon of silk saved from mother's old ball gown, shielded her from the drizzle. She felt exposed, her auburn curls frizzing at the temples despite the starch. Inside, the hall glowed with the warmth of beeswax candles and a roaring fire in the grand saloon. Lord Ashford awaited, his rotund figure squeezed into a velvet waistcoat, gold fobs dangling like temptations. Beside him stood Edward Harrington, Marquess of Windermere, taller than she'd imagined, his dark coat tailored to broad shoulders, breeches and boots polished to a gleam. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a jaw set like carved oak, and those eyes, grey as the lake in tempest, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Hawthorne," Ashford boomed, bowing with exaggerated flourish. "A pleasure. Allow me to present the Marquess of Windermere, your servant Edward." Eleanor curtsied, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "My lord." Her voice held steady, though curiosity warred with caution. Windermere's reputation preceded him, a man of wealth and isolation, shunning the season's balls for the wilds of his estate. What business had he here? Edward inclined his head, his gaze lingering a fraction too long. "Miss Hawthorne, Lord Ashford speaks highly of your family's resilience." The word hung in the air, laced with something unspoken. They settled into brocaded chairs around a low table laden with china and scones. Ashford prattled on about the weather, the fox hunt, but Eleanor's mind raced. The social rules were clear: an unchaperoned tea with two gentlemen, scandalous even in these rural reaches. Her mother had insisted on sending a note of acceptance, citing propriety, but now doubt gnawed. As the maid poured Darjeeling, stronger than their household brew, Ashford leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "To business, then. Windermere here won more than cards at our little gathering. He seeks an alliance, Miss Eleanor, a marriage contract to unite the estates. Hawthorne borders Blackwood. Imagine the synergies, shared lands, shared fortunes." Eleanor's teacup rattled against the saucer. Marriage, to this stranger, bartered like a hand of whist. Heat flooded her cheeks, not from flattery, but fury. "My Lord Ashford, you jest. My family is not a wager's prize." Edward's expression remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on the armrest. "No jest, Miss Hawthorne. I understand your position, the debts from your father's passing. I offer a solution. My name, my resources, in exchange for partnership, no sentiment, merely practicality." The room tilted. Partnership. It echoed the ledgers she'd pored over night after night, the creditors' letters piling like autumn leaves. Refusal meant Hawthorne's fall. Eviction, her mother cast to relatives' mercy. But acceptance, binding herself to a man whose eyes held shadows deeper than the fells. Allies. Ashford grinned like a fox in the henhouse, clearly mentor to this scheme. Antagonists? The village gossips, ready to paint her as the scheming spinster. "I need time," she managed, her voice a whisper. The cost pressed in, social isolation if she balked, whispers of desperation if she yielded. Protocol demanded she listen, but her spirit rebelled. "This upends everything. My mother—" "Time is a luxury you lack," Edward interjected softly, his tone not unkind, but firm as iron. "The bailiff's circle. Consider it a lifeline, not a chain." Ashford nodded vigorously. "Wise words. The contract's terms. Dowry waived, your mother's care assured, the estate intact under joint stewardship. Etiquette preserved, no elopement, a proper announcement at the next assembly." Eleanor's mind reeled. The new world unfolded starkly. Vigilance from society, every step scrutinized. Debts transmuted to obligations of rank. First obstacles reared. Calumny from those who'd call her a fortune hunter. Veto from her own pride. The veto of a life unlived. She rose abruptly, skirts whispering against the rug. "Gentlemen, I must consult my mother. This changes all." Edward stood as well, his presence towering yet restrained. Of course, but delay invites ruin. Outside, the rain had eased to mist, cloaking the drive in veils of grey. Eleanor's gig waited, but her thoughts churned like the lake's waves. Back at Hawthorne, she burst into the parlour, where Mother dozed by the fire. "Mother! They've proposed! A Marquess, through cards and Ashford's meddling!" Margaret's eyes widened, colour returning to her cheeks. "Windermere! Oh, Eleanor!" Refusal burned on Eleanor's tongue, but the ledgers mocked from the desk. Overdue notes a mere £300 to stave off auction. The social cost, exile to a cottage, spinsterhood's chill, or this, a forced choice, altering her status from debtor to marchioness. By evening, as twilight bled into the fells, Eleanor penned a tentative reply, acceptance of further talks. The quill trembled, inking her fate, but as she sealed the letter, a rider approached through the gloom, bearing word from the village solicitor. Debts accelerated, auction set for fortnight's end. No turning back now. The rupture had come, tearing her world asunder. Tomorrow she would meet Edward alone, under Mother's chaperonage, to negotiate terms that could save or doom everything she held dear. The gamble's shadow lengthened, pulling her into its depths. The carriage wheels crunched over gravel as Eleanor approached Blackwood Manor the following afternoon, the lake's mist clinging to the air like unspoken doubts. Under Mother's watchful eye, she had agreed to this private negotiation. No grand assembly, just a measured exchange in the Marquess's drawing room. Yet even this felt like a public trial, whispers of their arrangement already threading through Keswick's lanes. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap, the wool of her Spencer jacket rough against her palms. She wore a gown of fine cambric, borrowed from Mother's wardrobe, and let out at the seams, its high waist and puffed sleeves a nod to current fashion. Though the fabric whispered of better days, Lady Margaret sat beside her, pale but resolute, her lace mitts clasped tightly. "Remember, dear, poise above all. Windermere's name could shield us, but only if we navigate this with grace." The manor loomed, its grey stone facade softened by climbing roses, heavy with late blooms. A footman escorted them inside, the hall echoing with their footsteps on polished marble. Edward awaited in the drawing room, a space of opulent restraint, velvet drapes framing tall windows, a fire crackling in a hearth carved with heraldic motifs, shelves groaned under leather-bound volumes, and a grand pianoforte stood in the corner, its ebony surface gleaming like polished obsidian. "Miss Hawthorne, Lady Margaret," Edward said, rising from a wing-back chair. His voice was low, measured, like the toll of a distant bell. At 35, he cut an imposing figure in his tailored coat of superfine wool, cravat starched to perfection, his grey-streaked hair combed back severely. That scar traced his cheekbone, a faint white line against tanned skin, a mark of old violence, or perhaps deeper wounds. His eyes met Eleanor's, holding a flicker of something unguarded before the mask returned. They settled around a Sheraton table, tea service laid out with precision, porcelain cups, silver tongs for sugar lumps. Edward poured with steady hands, the steam rising like tentative bridges between them. "I appreciate your coming. Time presses, as we both know." Eleanor accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his for the briefest instant, a spark, unintended, that sent warmth racing up her arm. She withdrew quickly, cheeks flushing. "My lord, let's speak plainly. This proposal, it's born of cards and convenience. What assurances do I have beyond debts paid?" Mother interjected softly. "The estate's future, Edward, intact as promised?" He nodded, leaning forward, elbows on knees in a rare lapse of formality. "Blackwood's resources will cover the loans immediately. Hawthorne remains yours, managed jointly, no dissolution. And your mother's comfort. My physicians, if needed." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, probing. "But marriage demands more than ledgers. Trust, perhaps, or at least alliance." The word hung, testing the air. Eleanor sipped her tea, the brew robust with Assam leaves, a luxury Hawthorne could no longer afford. Around them, the room's opulence pressed in, crystal decanters on a sideboard, a portrait of Edward's late father glowering from the wall. Class friction simmered subtly, her mended hem against his polished boots, her practical reticule beside his signet ring etched with the Windermere crest. As talk turned to settlements, a knock interrupted. Jenkins, the butler, entered with a silver tray. A visitor, my lord. Mr. Reginald Blackwood, your cousin. He insists on paying respects." Edward's jaw tightened, a micro-gesture of irritation flickering across his face. "Show him in, but briefly." Reginald Blackwood swept in like a shadow gaining form, a man of 38, lean and sharp-featured, with slicked blonde hair and eyes like chipped flint. Distant kin to the Harrington line, he managed a portion of the estate's northern tenancies, but rumours painted him ambitious, resentful of Edward's title. His coat was modish, waistcoat embroidered with silver thread, yet his smile held an edge, like a blade sheathed too loosely. "Cousin," Reginald drawled, bowing with mock deference. His gaze slid to Eleanor and her mother, lingering assessingly. "And ladies, charmed. Word travels fast in these fells. Tea with the Hawthorne beauties. Quite the social stir." Eleanor's spine stiffened. Here was the antagonist in nascent form, lurking at the edges, his presence a subtle humiliation. Whispers of the gamble had reached him, no doubt, twisting it into scandalous fodder. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied coolly, "we discuss family matters. Your timing is fortuitous." He chuckled, low and insincere, circling the pianoforte with feigned interest. "Family indeed. Windermere, you've been reclusive too long. Marrying into debt? Bold. The village tongues wag already. The Marquess barters for a bride. Careful, or it'll sour the assembly next week." Edward rose, his frame blocking the light, a minimal defence that spoke volumes. "Enough, Reginald. Your counsel is neither sought nor welcome. See yourself out." Reginald's eyes narrowed, but he complied with a smirk, pausing at the door. "As you wish. But shadows lengthen, cousin. Watch your step." He departed, the door clicking shut like a warning. Silence fell, thick and charged. Mother fidgeted with her fan, but Eleanor felt the shift, a shared glance with Edward, his eyes softening imperceptibly, acknowledging the barb. He moved to the pianoforte, his fingers tracing the keys absently. "My mother's old instrument," he murmured. "She played Beethoven, rarely touched now." Eleanor rose, drawn despite herself. The keys were ivory, worn smooth. "May I?" At his nod, she sat, her hands hovering before releasing a cascade of notes, a simple air from Mozart, light and yearning. The music filled the room, bridging the chasm, their eyes meeting over the melody in a moment of unguarded silence. His hand rested near hers on the wood, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth, a small advance, fragile as the tune. As the last note faded, Edward cleared his throat. "You play with feeling, Miss Hawthorne. Perhaps there's harmony in this yet." Mother smiled faintly, but outside, carriage wheels approached again, unannounced visitors from the village drawn by gossip. By evening, as Eleanor returned home, a note arrived via post, a cutting remark from the Keswick Gazette's society column, hinting at a Marquess's curious courtship amid Hawthorne's woes. The social consequence rippled outward, eyes turning, judgments forming. Reginald's shadow loomed larger, his observation turning to action. What fresh intrigue brewed in those flinty eyes? The alliance teetered, one wrong step from fracture. The storm hit with the fury of the fells themselves, winds howling like banshees across Windermere's churning waters. Eleanor had planned a simple visit to Blackwood Manor that afternoon to discuss the settlement details with Edward under the watchful eye of her mother and his housekeeper. But as their carriage crested the ridge, dark clouds swallowed the sky and rain lashed down in sheets, turning the narrow lane into a river of mud. The horse reared, wheels slipping, and in moments they were stranded, half a mile from the manor, the driver cursing under his breath as lightning cracked overhead. "Inside, quickly!" Edward shouted, appearing on horseback from the gloom, his greatcoat soaked through. He'd been riding the estate bounds when the tempest broke. Without hesitation, he dismounted, offering his arm to Eleanor, while the driver led the horse to shelter. Lady Margaret clutched her shawl, her face ashen, but Eleanor felt a strange thrill amid the chaos, the raw force of nature mirroring the turmoil in her heart. They dashed toward a nearby gamekeeper's cottage, one of Blackwood's outbuildings, its thatched roof groaning under the gale. Edward shouldered the door open, ushering them into the dim interior. The space was sparse, a single room with a stone hearth, a trestle table scarred by years, and a narrow bed piled with woolen blankets. A lantern flickered to life as Edward lit it, casting shadows that danced like uneasy spirits. Rain drummed on the roof, sealing them in this forced intimacy, the world outside reduced to a blur of grey. Lady Margaret sank onto a stool by the fire Edward kindled, her coughs echoing softly. "We'll wait it out, I suppose. No sense tempting fate on these roads." She accepted a mug of water from the well bucket, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The housekeeper would send aid from the manor soon, Edward assured her, but for now they were cut off, chaperoned only by propriety and the storm's roar. Eleanor removed her sodden bonnet, auburn curls tumbling loose, damp tendrils framing her face. She paced the small space, her muslin gown clinging uncomfortably, the high neckline no match for the chill. Edward shrugged off his coat, hanging it by the fire, revealing a linen shirt molded to his broad chest. At 35, his frame spoke of restrained power, the shoulders of a man who rode the wilds alone, the hands calloused from reins and ledgers alike. Yet in this confined haven, his severity softened. He seemed less the Marquess, more a man weathering the same squall. "Sit, Miss Hawthorne," he said, pulling a chair closer to the flames. His voice held a quiet command, but his eyes, those storm-grey depths, betrayed a flicker of concern. "The storm will pass. These fells have seen worse." She obeyed, the warmth seeping into her bones, though tension coiled in her chest. The gossip from the Gazette still stung, Reginald Blackwood's barbs echoing in her mind. "This alliance, it's a tempest in itself, my lord. One moment harmony, the next—" "Edward," he corrected gently, kneeling to stoke the fire. Sparks flew up the chimney, illuminating the scar on his cheek, a thin reminder of duels fought in youth. If we're to be partners, names seem fitting. No titles in a cottage. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Eleanor, then. The word felt intimate, a bridge over the chasm of their worlds. As the fire crackled, conversation turned haltingly to the past, hers first, the luto for her father, the duty that had chained her to Hawthorne's crumbling walls. He taught me the estate's rhythms, she confessed, staring into the flames. The sheep's grazing patterns, the lake's moods, but after he went it was just survival. Pride kept us afloat, but barely. Edward listened, his gaze steady, humanizing the stoic Marquess she'd glimpsed before. He rose, crossing to a wooden chest in the corner. His mother's heirloom, he explained, brought here for safekeeping during hunts. From it, he drew a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed, edges frayed. She loved poetry, he said, handing it to her. Wordsworth mostly. The lakes spoke to her soul. He opened it to a marked passage, his voice low as he read aloud, "I wandered lonely as a cloud." The words wove through the storm's din, a melody of melancholy beauty. Eleanor's fingers brushed the page, tracing faded ink. This anchor, the book inherited and untouched, unveiled layers. Edward's guilt over his family's fractures, siblings lost to illness and wanderlust, leaving him the solitary guardian of Blackwood. "I vowed no entanglements," he admitted, closing the volume. "Love seemed a debt I couldn't pay, but your fire, it reminds me of her, unyielding." The air shifted, charged with unspoken promise. He placed the book in her hands, a tacit gesture, trust offered like the warmth of his palm lingering near hers. Eleanor's heart quickened. In this confinement, barriers crumbled, revealing not cold duty, but a man scarred by loss, seeking redemption. She met his eyes, the silence between them thick with potential, a shared breath that warmed more than the fire. Outside, the rain eased to a patter, but a distant thunder rolled, a sign the storm lingered. Lady Margaret dozed lightly, granting them this fragile bubble. Edward's hand covered hers briefly on the book, a gesture of alliance, changing the emotional tide from wary negotiation to tentative kinship. "We'll face the shadows together," he murmured. "No more solitude." Eleanor's lips curved in a soft smile, trust budding like heather after rain. For the first time, the gamble felt less like chains, more like wings. Yet as the clouds parted, a rider approached through the mist, Reginald Blackwood. His horse lathered, a sealed letter in hand. "Urgent missive for you, cousin," he called, his flinty eyes narrowing at Eleanor. "From London. Creditors, it seems. Hawthorne's debts. They've drawn interest from sharper lenders." Edward took the letter, his jaw setting as he scanned the words. Demands escalated, threats of seizure veiled in legalese. The fragile warmth shattered, the emotional tide receding into doubt. Reginald lingered, his smirk a signal of machinations afoot before wheeling away. Eleanor watched him go, the book heavy in her lap. What new sabotage brewed? The path ahead darkened once more. The letter's wax seal cracked under Edward's thumb like brittle ice, the words within leaping out in stark black ink. Demands from London moneylenders, escalated by interest and penalties. Hawthorne's debts now swollen to £600, with threats of immediate seizure if unpaid within the week. Edward's face hardened, the firelight carving deeper shadows across his scar. He folded the parchment slowly, his eyes meeting Eleanor's across the cottage's dim glow. The storm outside had faded to a whisper, but this new tempest brewed hotter. Reginald's parting smirk, a venomous aftertaste. "Eleanor," Edward said, voice low and edged with steel, "this changes nothing. Blackwood's funds will cover it by dawn. We'll send Jenkins with the draft tomorrow." She nodded, But the book in her lap felt heavier now, Wordsworth's verses mocking their fragile peace. Trust had bloomed in the storm's confines, a tentative vine reaching for sun. Yet Reginald's intrusion soured it, his eyes raking over her like she was chattel on the block. "Your cousin. He takes pleasure in this, doesn't he? Watching us scramble." Edward's jaw clenched. Reginald covets what isn't his. The title, the lands. He's schemed before, tampering with tenancies, whispering to solicitors. But this... He trailed off, crumpling the letter in his fist. The warmth of moments ago evaporated, replaced by the chill of intrusion. Lady Margaret stirred, rubbing her eyes. "We should return to the manor." The rains passed. They emerged into the misty fells, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. Edward's horse waited, saddled by the gamekeeper who'd arrived with lanterns. He helped Eleanor mount the borrowed side saddle, his hand steady on her waist, a lingering touch that spoke of unresolved promise. But as their small party rode back, the path felt narrower, hemmed by encroaching doubts. Reginald's horse tracks mingled with theirs in the mud, a taunting trail. By evening, Blackwood Manor's drawing room enveloped them in deceptive calm. Servants bustled with hot mulled wine and drying cloths, but tension coiled like smoke from the hearth. Eleanor changed into a spare gown from the guest chambers, a simple wool of midnight blue, its empire waist cinched with a borrowed sash, the fabric soft against her chilled skin. She rejoined Edward and her mother by the fire, the pianoforte silent now, its keys a reminder of harmony interrupted. "We'll wed quietly," Edward proposed, pacing the Axminster rug, a special license from the bishop in Carlisle. No need for the assembly's scrutiny. The debts dissolve with the vows. Lady Margaret brightened slightly, her frail hands warming on the cup. "Wise, my lord. Discretion preserves us all." Eleanor searched his face, seeking the man from the cottage, the one who'd read poetry with quiet fire. And after, joint stewardship. "You said, but Reginald, he'll poison the well." The village already murmurs. Before Edward could reply, a thunderous knock echoed from the hall. Jenkins hurried in, face ashen. "My lord, Mr. Blackwood returns, with companions. Insists on an audience, something about estate matters, urgent, he claims." Edward's eyes darkened to slate. "Let him in, but arm the footman discreetly." Reginald entered like a conqueror, flanked by two burly men in solicitor's drab, strangers from Kendal, their ledgers clutched like weapons. His smirk had sharpened to a blade, blonde hair dishevelled from the ride, coat unbuttoned to reveal a waistcoat strained over his lean frame. At 38, he carried the air of a fox circling prey, his flinty eyes darting from Edward to Eleanor with predatory glee. "Cousin," Reginald drawled, tossing a sheaf of papers onto the table. They scattered like fallen leaves, affidavits, yellowed contracts, scrawled in hasty ink. "Forgive the intrusion, but duty calls. These good men from Hargrove's firm in Kendal bear witness. Hawthorne's debts? I've acquired them. A tidy investment, you see. Father's old loans, bundled and sold. Now they're mine to collect." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The room spun, the fire's roar fading to a distant hum. Acquired, sabotage, frontal and vicious, striking at the heart of their alliance. "You bought our ruin?" Her voice cracked, green eyes blazing. "For what? To watch us beg?" Reginald's laugh was a bark, echoing off the panelled walls. "Sharp as ever, Miss Hawthorne. But business is business. The sum's due at once, £600 plus my generous interest. Pay or Hawthorne goes to auction. And you, cousin." He turned to Edward, eyes narrowing. "Interfering in this partnership? It reeks of favoritism. The family's solicitors will hear of it. Nepotism, perhaps even fraud in estate dealings. I've letters from tenants, complaints of your neglect. Blackwood's shares could shift, you know, to more capable hands." Edward surged forward, fists balled, but halted at Eleanor's gasp. The men shifted uneasily, one hand drifting to a pocket. Intimidation veiled as protocol. This was no private quarrel. Reginald had dragged it public, witnesses turning whispers to weapons. The Marquess's reputation, ironclad in isolation, now teetered. Accusations of meddling could fracture alliances with neighbouring lords, isolate Blackwood from trade and favour. "Out!" Edward growled, voice a low thunder. "You'll get nothing tonight. Law will settle this." Reginald scooped up the papers, his companions following like hounds. At the door he paused, voice dripping venom. "Law favours the prepared, Edward. By week's end choose, pay for the chit, or watch her world burn, and you, alone again as fate intended." He vanished into the night, leaving the door ajar, chill wind snaking in. Silence crashed down, heavier than the storm. Lady Margaret wept softly, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Eleanor stood frozen, the betrayal a knife to her gut, reputation shredded before the ink dried. Their project of alliance fracturing under public glare. Trust cracked. Edward's defence had been fierce, but Reginald's strike severed the budding bond, forcing separation. She couldn't drag him into this abyss, not when his own shadows loomed. I must go," Eleanor whispered, gathering her shawl. "This taints you too. Hawthorne's curse, not yours." Edward reached for her arm, his touch desperate. "No, we face it together." But she pulled away, the moment irreversible, a point of no return, her isolation deepening as pride warred with need. Outside the carriage waited, lanterns flickering like dying hopes. As it bore her home through the moonlit fells, a final ultimatum burned in her mind: yield to Reginald's grasp or lose everything. Edward watched from the steps, alone in the gathering dark, the fracture widening between them. What desperate gambit could mend it now? Dawn broke over the Lake District like a hesitant promise, pale light filtering through Hawthorne Manor's frost-laced windows. Eleanor hadn't slept. The carriage ride home the night before replayed in her mind, Edward's desperate grasp, Reginald's venomous exit, the ledger's weight crushing her resolve. At 22 she felt ancient, her auburn hair tangled from restless tossing, green eyes shadowed by resolve. She rose, slipping into a simple morning gown of bombazine, its sombre grey echoing her mood, the high neckline buttoned to her throat against the chill. Downstairs, the parlour felt smaller, the fire unlit. Papers strewn across the desk like battlefield remnants. Mother's coughs echoed from her chamber, a frail reminder of stakes too high for surrender. Eleanor poured weak tea, her hands steady now, fueled by a simmering fury. Reginald Blackwood, 38, ambitious kin to Edward, with his slick smiles and predatory gaze, had twisted debts into daggers. Acquired them? No coincidence. She rifled through father's old trunk in the corner, hidden behind faded curtains. Dust motes danced as she unearthed a locked box, its key long lost to memory. With a hairpin, she pried it open. Inside lay proofs, yellowed letters from Kendall solicitors, dated 2 years past, detailing loans bundled and sold. One name recurred, Blackwood, Reginald's signature, scrawled boldly, authorizing the transfer. Her breath caught, manipulation pure and vile. He'd preyed on father's illness, whispering terms to merchants, hoarding the notes like a miser. A small diary followed, father's hand trembling across pages. R. Blackwood calls again, promises leniency for a favour, tenancy rights on the North Fells, refused, God help us if he turns. Eleanor's pulse thundered. This wasn't mere opportunism. It was a plot, woven since father's death, to seize Hawthorne and leverage it against Blackwood Manor. Reginald's resentment of Edward, cousin, rival for the title's shadow, drove it. She clutched the diary, tears blurring the ink, Peak of indignation surged. How dare he, a man of respectable blood, sabotaging widows and daughters for greed? But anger forged action. No more hiding in Manor's shadows. Eleanor penned a letter, quill flying across foolscap, her words sharp as lake steel. Addressed to the Keswick Assembly's stewards, village elders, clergy, neighbouring gentry, she exposed the scheme, proofs enclosed. Reginald's forgery in the bundling, his threats veiled as business. Justice demands transparency, she wrote. Hawthorne stands not on charity, but honour. Let the community judge. She sealed it with wax, her hands smudged but sure, proactive, public, altering perceptions from desperate debtor to defiant guardian. Bess, the maid, entered with kindling. "Miss, you look fierce as a fell cat. Post this to the assembly hall, Bess, at once." As the girl hurried out, Eleanor felt the shift. Agency claimed. Her voice no longer whispered in parlours. By midday, word spread like heather fire. Tenants arrived at the manor door, Mr. Fletcher with his cap in hand, Widow Tate bearing scones. "Heard you're fighting back, miss. That snake Blackwood's been squeezing us too. Fences unpaid, rents hiked." Eleanor met them in the garden, mist curling around Rose's hips. She shared the proofs, voices rising in outrage. Testimony flowed, a shepherd's account of Reginald altering boundary stones, a miller's tale of forged receipts. The valley of danger loomed. Reginald's response would be swift, perhaps legal reprisal, but hope peaked as allies rallied, their support a balm. Edward arrived unannounced by afternoon, his horse lathered, face etched with worry. He dismounted in the drive, coat dusted from the ride, grey eyes searching hers. "Eleanor, the village buzzes. Your letter." Bold, reckless even. She faced him on the steps, diary in hand. "Necessary. Read this." She thrust father's words at him, watching his expression fracture, guilt etching deeper lines around his mouth. He scanned the pages, shoulders sagging. "This explains much." Edward's voice cracked, reframing him before her eyes. Not cold duty, but a man's burden, guilt over his own isolation, the duty to Blackwood that blinded him to kin's rot. "Reginald's envy festers since boyhood. I ignored it, buried in my solitude. After my siblings, after the fevers took them, I vowed protection, but I failed you all." His hand grazed hers, a contained reapproach, trust rebuilding. "Warmer than passion's fire. Your courage shames me. Together we end this." The moment swelled, hope cresting as their fingers intertwined, a silent vow amid the garden's hush. Eleanor's heart swelled. Here was the man unmasked, not granite, but granite veined with vulnerability. Yet the valley plunged swift. A rider galloped up, Reginald himself, face thunderous, a crumpled copy of her letter in his fist. "You meddling wench," he snarled, dismounting with a whip crack. Tenants scattered, but Eleanor stood firm, Edward stepping protectively before her. "Slander! I'll sue for libel. Drag Hawthorne through courts. And you, cousin, complicit now. The assembly will see you as the puppet master." Edward's grip tightened on her hand. "The proofs speak, Reginald. Your forgery ends here." Reginald spat, eyes wild. "Ends, it begins. I've summoned the full assembly. Tomorrow night at the Keswick Hall. Public reckoning. Bring your honour, Miss Hawthorne. See if it saves you." He remounted, wheeling away in a spray of gravel, his threat a darkening cloud. Eleanor leaned into Edward, the peak of indignation boiling, public hatred for the villain's cruelty. His fall anticipated, but danger shadowed. The assembly, a decisive forum of bailiffs, gentry and whispers. Trust anchored them, yet the confrontation loomed, fates to be sealed under candlelight and judgment. What revelations would the hall unleash? The Keswick Assembly Hall thrummed with anticipation, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows cast by 100 flickering candles. Chandeliers dripped wax like melting resolve, illuminating faces flushed with wine and whispers. Gentry from the surrounding fells packed the benches, landed squires in starched cravats, their wives in silk gowns rustling like autumn leaves, village elders nursing tankards of ale. The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax, roast mutton from the supper tables, and the undercurrent of scandal. It was 1815, and in this rural heart of the Lake District, assemblies were more than dances. They were courts of public opinion, where reputations rose or shattered like storm-tossed waves. Eleanor stood at the edge of the throng, her heart pounding, a fierce tattoo against her ribs. She had donned her finest gown for this, a high-waisted empire silhouette in deep emerald silk, borrowed from a sympathetic neighbor and altered by Bess's deft hands. The fabric shimmered softly, its modest neckline framed by a lace Bertha collar, long sleeves tapering to delicate cuffs. A single pearl brooch, her mother's heirloom, pinned the bodice, a symbol of fragile legacy. At 22, she felt the weight of every eye, her auburn curls pinned in a simple chignon, green gaze steady despite the knot of dread in her stomach. Edward flanked her, his presence a solid anchor. Tall in black superfine coat and silver-embroidered waistcoat, grey-streaked hair combed back, that scar a faint silver thread in the candlelight. His hand brushed hers discreetly, a silent vow amid the murmur. Lady Margaret sat nearby, chaperoned by Widow Tate, her lace cap nodding faintly as she clutched a fan. Tenants and allies clustered around, Mr. Fletcher with his weathered cap, the miller from Ambleside, forming a makeshift phalanx. The hall's rules governed this. No outright brawls, but words cut deeper than dueling pistols. Reginald had summoned it as reckoning, but Eleanor and Edward had prepared, their strategy woven in hurried notes the night before. Proofs tucked in Edward's pocket, the diary, affidavits, tenant testimonies. Moral choice loomed. Who would they be? Victims bartered by fate, or guardians of honor? The steward, a portly parson named Mr. Hale, rapped his gavel on the oak podium. Order! This assembly convenes for matters of estate and equity. Mr. Reginald Blackwood steps forward first. Reginald strode to the center, his lean frame cutting through the crowd like a blade. At 38, he exuded false assurance. Blonde hair slicked, modish coat of bottle green hugging his shoulders. A dossier of papers clutched in one gloved hand, flanked by his bought witnesses, the Kendall solicitors, faces oily with complicity, and a shifty tenant coerced with coin, his eyes locked on Eleanor, flinty and triumphant. "Esteemed assembly," he began, voice oily smooth, "I come as creditor and kin, exposing a grievous plot. The Hawthorne debts, rightfully mine through fair purchase, have been undermined by undue influence from the Marquess of Windermere, letters falsified, tenants bribed. See here." He flourished the dossier. Forged receipts, a witness's affidavit swearing Eleanor had begged favors, a false letter purportedly from Edward promising Blackwood shares for silence. Gasps rippled, heads turned, whispers sharpening to accusations. This alliance is fraud, the chit hunts fortune, the Marquess meddles for land. Justice demands seizure, Hawthorne auctioned, Windermere censured. The hall erupted, murmurs swelling to a roar. A squire from Grasmere leaned in, brow furrowed. Scandalous, if true. Eleanor's cheeks burned, humiliation's sting acute, the community's gaze reframing her as schemer, not survivor. Reginald's final sabotage landed like a thunderclap, his bought men nodding vigorously, one stepping forward with a trembling testimony. I saw the Marquess's man tampering with bonds." Edward's grip tightened on her arm, his jaw a granite line. But Eleanor stepped forward, voice clear as lake water. "Lies, Mr. Blackwood, crafted in shadows to claim what isn't yours." She nodded to Edward, who produced the diary, its leather worn as truth itself. "Read father's words, assembly. Reginald forged the bundling, preyed on illness. twisted loans for gain. Pages turned, the parson scanning aloud, entries of coercion, boundary encroachments, Reginald's leniency demands. Tenants surged forward. Mr. Fletcher first, cap in hand. He's right, she is. Blackwood hiked our rents, stole fence timber. I saw him alter the stones myself. The miller followed, voice booming. Forged my receipts too, pocketed wool profits. Witnesses piled on, a cascade of indignation. Reginald paled, his dossier wilting in his grasp. Slander! These are paupers bought by her tears! But the tide turned. A dowager from Rydal, fan snapping, rose. Enough! We've heard enough of your greed, Blackwood. Windermere's name stands, yours crumbles. Murmurs shifted, sympathy blooming for Eleanor, her poise transforming humiliation to respect. Edward added the capstone, his voice resonant. No meddling, only alliance born of necessity. Reginald's envy poisons kin. Siblings lost, estates bled for his ambition. We choose honor over chains. The assembly roared approval, gavel pounding for order. Reginald staggered back, face ashen, his witnesses slinking away like rats from light. This farce, he sputtered, but Hale's verdict fell. Debts voided as fraudulent. Blackwood, your claims dismissed. Face the courts for forgery. Cheers erupted, the hall alive with vindication. Reginald fled amid jeers, his public fall a cathartic thunder, greed exposed, ambition shattered. Eleanor's chest swelled, the peak of euphoria crashing over her, justice resounding and sweet, the community's embrace warming like summer sun on the fells. As the clamour faded, Edward drew her aside to a quiet alcove, the din a distant hum. His eyes, soft now, met hers. We did it. Together. His hand found hers in the shadows, fingers lacing, a tacit commitment, intimate as a whispered oath. The silence wrapped them, post-storm calm settling like mist on still waters. No words needed. Their bond sealed, unbreakable. If you're thrilled by this victory, hit that like button if you've enjoyed the story so far, and subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss any other heart-pounding tales like this one. The morning after the assembly dawned crisp and golden over the Lake District, sunlight gilding the lake's surface like a promise fulfilled. Eleanor woke in Hawthorne Manor's sunlit bedchamber, the events of the night before settling into her bones like a long-held breath released. At 22, she felt transformed. Her auburn hair loose across the pillows, green eyes bright with a quiet triumph. The emerald silk gown lay draped over a chair, a relic of battle won, now to be cherished rather than borrowed. She rose, slipping into a simple morning dress of soft cambric, its pale yellow evoking spring's renewal, the high waist cinched with a ribbon that felt less like constraint and more like freedom. Downstairs, the parlour buzzed with unaccustomed life. Servants, Bess and Tilly, joined by two from Blackwood, hustled with trays of fresh scones and strong tea, the air scented with cinnamon and relief. Lady Margaret sat by the window, colour returned to her cheeks, her lace cap perched jauntily as she sipped from a porcelain cup unbroken for years. "Eleanor, dear," she said, voice steadier than in months, "the post brings congratulations already, from the parson, even the squire from Grasmere. You've turned the tide." Eleanor smiled, pouring her own tea, the steam curling like fading doubts. Legal threads unravelled swiftly in the night's wake. By dawn, Mr. Hale the steward had dispatched riders to Carlisle with the Assembly's verdict. Reginald's claims declared fraudulent, his forged documents seized as evidence. The courts would follow, charges of embezzlement and coercion, stripping him of tenancy rights over Blackwood's northern lands. No exile to distant shores, but a concrete fall, his Kendall holdings auctioned to pay reparations, his name struck from family ledgers, reduced to a clerk's post in some forgotten mill if mercy allowed. Whispers already painted him pariah, shunned at inns and markets, his ambitious gleam dulled to desperation. Edward arrived mid-morning, his carriage rolling up the drive with purposeful grace. He dismounted in riding boots still dusted from the fells, his dark coat unbuttoned to reveal a waistcoat of subtle grey silk, the Windermere crest glinting on his fob. At 35, the lines around his eyes softened, that scar on his cheek no longer a mark of isolation but of battles shared. He carried a small velvet box, its lid etched simply, no heirlooms tainted by old feuds, just a new beginning forged in Keswick's goldsmith shop overnight. "Eleanor," he said, taking her hands in the garden, where roses nodded in the breeze. Lady Margaret watched from the terrace, a discreet chaperone approving the scene. "The solicitors confirm it. Reginald sanctioned, debts voided, Hawthorne secured. No more shadows." She searched his face, seeing the transformation. His voice warmer, laced with compassion rather than command. Leadership tempered by the vulnerability they'd uncovered in the cottage storm. "And us?" she asked, heart quickening. No longer a gambler's prize or desperate alliance, but equals choosing freely. He opened the box, revealing a gold band, plain yet elegant, set with a single lake pearl, symbol of their shared waters. No family curse clung to it. He'd designed it himself, sketched by lantern light after the assembly's roar. "By choice," he murmured, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, cool against her skin, warming with their touch. Partners in all, Blackwood and Hawthorne, united not by need, but by this. Tears pricked her eyes, but she laughed softly, a sound light as birdsong. Their lips met then, a kiss born of love, not duty, gentle under the garden's arch, the world blurring to just them. Horizons stretched, joint stewardship of the estates, wool markets revived, tenants thriving under fair rents. Edward's compassion shone in plans shared over luncheon, a village school in Keswick, funded by Blackwood's coffers, teaching letters and numbers to shepherds' children, like Mr. Fletcher's grandchildren. Eleanor envisioned a library at Hawthorne, shelves restocked with Wordsworth and more, open to all, her music lessons woven in. Legacy took shape, not marble monuments, but lives lifted, the fells echoing with opportunity. Coadjutants found their places too. Mr. Fletcher earned a foreman's wage, his croft repaired with new timber. Widow Tate became housekeeper at the United Manor, her scones a staple at gatherings. The miller from Ambleside, once neutral in the fray, now traded wool with Blackwood at premium rates, his loyalty bought by justice. Even Lady Margaret bloomed, her health mending under Edward's physicians. A wing of hawthorn set aside for her comfort, roses planted at her window, overlooking the lake she loved. By afternoon, they walked the bordering lands, hands linked, the pearl ring catching sunlight. Edward paused at an overlook, the water below calm as their resolve. "I thought solitude my fate," he confessed, voice rich with newfound ease. "But you've given me a future. Children, perhaps running these hills." Eleanor leaned into him, her leadership evident in the steady gaze she returned. "A family, yes. Mothers and fathers teaching strength, not survival." The image lingered, little ones with his grey eyes and her fire, chasing sheep through heather, the estates a haven. As evening fell, a soft knock came at Hawthorne's door, a letter from London, sealed with the bishop's mark. The special license granted, their wedding set for week's end in the village chapel, simple and profound. No grand fanfare, just allies gathered, vows exchanged under stained glass. But as Edward sealed it away, a rider approached from the north, news of Reginald's flight to Scotland, a final echo of defeat. Yet in that moment it mattered little. Their new equilibrium stood firm. Love the cornerstone. In the quiet parlour that night, fire crackling, Eleanor played the pianoforte, a lively reel from Scottish airs. Edward turning pages with a smile. The book of poetry lay open nearby, its pages no longer dusty but alive. Horizons beckoned, a life woven from Gamble's chants into enduring tapestry, children to come, legacies enduring. And as stars pricked the sky over the lake, their kiss deepened, sealing not just vows, but eternity. 10 years had woven their gentle spell over the Lake District, turning the wild fells into a tapestry of quiet abundance. It was 1825 now, and Hawthorne Manor, no longer a solitary holdout against ruin, stood merged seamlessly with Blackwood's grander silhouette, their bordering lands a verdant expanse of thriving meadows and restored orchards. The air carried the scent of blooming lavender from the new gardens Eleanor had planted, mingling with the ever-present tang of the lake below, where sunlight danced like scattered diamonds. Edward Harrington, Marquess of Windermere, paused on the terrace steps, his broad frame leaning against the stone balustrade. At 45, time had softened the granite edges of his youth. The grey streaks in his raven hair had spread, lending him a distinguished air, and that faint scar on his cheek caught the light like a badge of battles long won. He wore a simple coat of fine wool, unbuttoned against the mild breeze, his cravat loosened in the privacy of home. No longer the solitary gambler who'd stared into dying embers, Edward now carried the warmth of a man fulfilled, his storm-grey eyes crinkling at the corners with easy laughter. From the garden below rose the voices of their children, 3 in all, blessings born of that fateful gamble turned vow. The eldest, little Margaret, named for Eleanor's mother, chased her brothers through the rose arbours at 9 years old. Her auburn curls bounced like her mother's, and her green eyes sparkled with the same fierce curiosity. "Papa, watch this!" she called, launching a wooden hoop down the path, her simple frock of sprigged cotton swirling around sturdy legs. Edward smiled, waving. Trailing her were the twins, Henry and Thomas, 7-year-old whirlwinds with his dark hair and a penchant for mischief. They tumbled over each other in mock duels with stick swords, their laughter echoing off the lake like joyful bells. "Yield, varlet!" Henry shouted, his voice piping high. The boys wore breeches and smocks of sturdy linen, knees muddied from earlier romps by the shore. Edward had taught them the estate's rhythms, the sheep's grazing trails, the subtle shifts in the wind that heralded rain, just as Eleanor's father had once done for her. But it was Eleanor who emerged from the manor doors then, drawing his gaze like the sun pulling morning mist. At 32, she moved with the grace of one who'd claimed her world, her figure softened by motherhood, yet lithe from daily walks across their lands. Her gown, a flowing muslin of soft blue with a high waist and delicate embroidery at the cuffs, suited the era's elegance, modest, practical for a marchioness who tended gardens as readily as ledgers. Auburn waves framed her face, pinned loosely with pearl combs, and her green eyes held a depth of contentment that made his heart ache with remembered longing. She joined him on the terrace, slipping her hand into his, the gold band with its lake pearl still gleaming on her finger, a talisman of their union, worn smooth by time. "The children," she murmured, leaning into his side, her voice rich with affection. "They grow wilder each day, like the fells themselves." Edward turned, pressing a kiss to her temple, the gesture intimate and unhurried. Like their mother, unyielding, full of fire. Their love had not merely resisted time, it had deepened, rooted in the storms they'd weathered together. No grand passions of youth, but a steady flame, shared glances over breakfast tables, quiet evenings by the pianoforte, where she still coaxed melodies from Handel's suites, and his voice reading Wordsworth aloud as the children nestled close. The gamble that had brought them here felt like destiny now, a hand dealt not in folly, but in profound grace. From the drive below, Lady Margaret approached slowly, her arm linked with Widow Tate's. At 60, Eleanor's mother had outlived the frail shadow of those debt-ridden years, her silver hair coiled neatly under a lace cap, her shawl of fine cashmere a gift from Edward's physicians, who'd seen her cough fade to memory under their care. She beamed up at them, her blue eyes bright. "The school's assembly goes well, Eleanor." Little Fletcher's grandson recited his letters flawlessly. "Your library's shelves overflow now, donations from Rydal's dowagers." Eleanor squeezed Edward's hand, pride swelling. Their legacies bloomed across the valley. The Keswick School, funded by Blackwood's wool profits, taught 24 children each term, from shepherd's sons to miller's daughters. Hawthorne's library stood open to all, its rooms alive with borrowers poring over volumes restored and expanded, poetry, histories, even practical tomes on estate management. The estates thrived under joint stewardship, tenants like Mr. Fletcher prospering with fair rents and repaired crofts, wool fetching premium prices in Kendal markets. No more auctions loomed, abundance had replaced scarcity, yet not all had escaped unscathed. Reginald Blackwood's fate lingered as a sombre note in their nostalgia, a price paid in full for greed's folly. After fleeing to Scotland a decade past, he'd scraped by in obscurity, a disgraced clerk in Edinburgh's dim offices, his once ambitious eyes dulled by regret. Whispers reached them sporadically, a letter from a distant cousin, tales from travelling merchants. No family welcomed him. His forgeries had branded him outcast, his northern tenancies long forfeited to honest hands. Edward had once considered mercy, a quiet pension perhaps, but Eleanor's fire had prevailed. Justice, not pity, for the wounds he'd inflicted. Reginald paid dearly, alone in rented rooms, a cautionary shadow against their sunlit world. As the sun dipped toward the lake, the family gathered on the terrace. The children clambered up, demanding stories of the Great Assembly, their wide eyes devouring the tale of courage and villainy. Eleanor wove it with dramatic pauses, her voice rising and falling like the waves below, while Edward added gravelly asides, his arm around her shoulders. Lady Margaret chuckled softly, and even the servants paused in their duties, drawn by the warmth. In that golden hour, nostalgia wrapped them like a well-worn shawl, memories of rain-lashed cottages, tense assemblies, the crack of that fateful letter's seal. They'd built more than estates, a haven, where love's gamble yielded not just children, but a legacy of resilience. Edward met Eleanor's gaze over the children's heads, a silent promise renewed. The fells stretched eternal before them, whispering of tomorrows yet to unfold, their hearts full in the enduring light. As the sun set over the tranquil waters of Windermere, casting a rosy glow across the united estates of Hawthorne and Blackwood, Edward and Eleanor Harrington stood hand in hand on the terrace, their children's laughter fading into the evening chorus of crickets and gentle waves. 10 years had transformed not just their lives, but the very landscape of their world, a testament to the power of choices made in the face of uncertainty. What began as a desperate gamble in a smoke-filled card-room had blossomed into a legacy of love, resilience, and unyielding hope. Edward, once a man resigned to solitude, now gazed at his wife with eyes full of gratitude. The scar on his cheek, a faint reminder of old wounds healed by her fire. Eleanor, the defiant daughter who refused to be bartered, had found in him not a savior, but a true partner, their bond forged in storms and sealed by mutual respect. This tale whispers profound lessons to us all. First, that courage in the darkest hour can rewrite fate. Eleanor's bold stand at the assembly, diary in hand, turned whispers of scandal into roars of justice, proving that one voice, raised with truth, can topple empires of deceit. Second, love is no gambler's whim but a deliberate alliance, built on trust and shared burdens. Edward's evolution from isolated Marquess to devoted father and husband shows how vulnerability invites connection, turning isolation into abundance. And finally, adversity reveals character. Reginald's downfall reminds us that greed devours its host, while integrity endures, lifting families and communities alike. In an era of rigid hierarchies and hidden debts, their story endures as a beacon. No chain of circumstance is unbreakable when hearts align. If this journey through the misty fells and heartfelt trials moved you, drop a comment below sharing what resonated most. Perhaps the thrill of the assembly's climax or the warmth of their family's future. To show you've journeyed to the very end with me, write the word victory in your comment. It'll let me know you're a true companion in these tales and help spread the magic to others. And don't forget to like if the drama kept you hooked. Subscribe for more sweeping romances from Regency England's hidden corners. And check the cards for similar stories of forbidden love and triumphant spirits. Until our next adventure, may your own gambles lead to hearts as full as theirs.